Hello and welcome once again to Mini Bites. This is our last week of the chronological parables of Jesus. So grab your Bibles and turn to Matthew chapter 22. We will still have our Sunday edition, which will cover the last two parables of Jesus, which will be the 33rd and 34th parable. But today we're going to cover the 32nd parable, which is the parable of the wedding supper or the wedding banquet. So let's go ahead and dive into Matthew chapter 22 and begin it. Matthew chapter 22, beginning with verse 1. Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come." So this finds its ultimate fulfillment in the wedding supper of the Lamb in heaven. And so this parable is most certainly referring to the ultimate king, which is God, having a wedding supper for his son, which is Jesus, sending out his servants, which are the disciples. So disciples servants equals disciples. So he sends out his servants, which are the disciples, to invite people to come in, but they refuse to come. So those who, at the beginning of this parable that he sent out to invite to come in would be Israel, because Jesus first came to save the lost ones of Israel, but they refused to come in. So first there was a refusal. Verse 4, then he sent some more servants and said, "Tell those who have been invited that I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fatted cattle have been butchered and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet." Verse 5, but they paid no attention and went off. So first there was refusal, then there was indifference. And so this wasn't just prior to his crucifixion and his resurrection, which of course did happen, that there was first refusal, then indifference. But this is for all time as well, that first there's a refusal and then there's indifference. And so this is for all time, that we first refuse Christ, then there's indifference. This is mankind's plague. This is what sin does to man's heart. But they paid no attention and went off, one to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. So this is what happened with Christ. Ultimately, the Messiah himself was mistreated and beaten and crucified, all without sin. But also his disciples his servants were captured and taken and beaten and imprisoned, and some of them martyred and killed. And so Jesus, in telling this parable, is also prophesying of what was to come. And then he says in verse 7, the king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. So what he's doing right here in this parable, though he's telling a parable, and as we've seen from this whole 10-week series of these parables, a parable, its main point is to tell a story, an elongated a metaphor, if you will, to come to a main point, and then also other smaller points as well, perhaps. But in this one, is also prophesying, and he goes into greater detail in Matthew chapter 24. This actually occurs in AD 70, that he does, in fact, send an army to destroy Jerusalem. And it's because he's enraged of what has happened to his servants. Verse 8, then he said to his servants, the wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. So this is the clarion gospel call. He sends out his servants, just as he sends you and I out, to go and beckon them to come to himself, to come to the King, to come to the Son of God, to come and partake of the wedding supper of the Lamb. But they did not come. So the wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. Go to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you find. So now the call isn't just to the Jews or to Israel. It is now to Gentile alike. It is to everyone. Go to the street corners, go to everywhere and call everyone that you find. Verse 10, so the servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, both good and bad, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. Notice it says both good and bad. They did not want the servants to use, or he did not want the servants to use their own judgment. Because when we see good or bad with our own eyes, we see it based on their merit, based on what they do, based on their attitudes, based on outward appearance. But God looks at the heart. When I graduated high school, I quit the job that I had at Albertsons and I started working as a salesman at Jeep Eagle. It's Plaza Jeep Eagle isn't even a place any longer, but I started selling cars. And my first month, I was salesman of the month. I sold the most cars. I had a really nice paycheck at the end of the month. And I thought, man, this is gravy. This is good. I'm really good at this. So the first month I was salesman of the month. My second month, I had only sold one car and I was the lowest man on the totem pole and I hated my job. First month, loved it. Second month, I absolutely hated it. I wanted out. I felt like I couldn't make any money. I just loathed it. And I remember talking to one of the more seasoned salesmen. What happened? How could I go from being salesman of the month to not being able to sell at all? And I clearly remember 25 plus years ago, 30 almost years ago, what he said to me. And he said, your first month, you sold to everybody who came on the lot. By your second month, you started looking at what they drove in. You started looking at the clothes that they wore. You started looking at their appearance and how they were looking at cars. And you started judging them based on if they would have credit or not. You started judging them based on whether they were serious or not. Before, you were trying to sell anybody and everybody. But after a while, you learned how to sell and you learned who could possibly get approved or not and who was serious or not. And so in other words, before I would happen into sales. There was some sales that I would make that probably shouldn't have made because I was just eager. And so by the second month, I was judging people based on good or bad. And so we leave that to God. And that's what he's saying here is we leave that to God, just as he said in an earlier parable about good fish and bad fish, that we're supposed to just catch them and then he sorts them out. And so what we're supposed to do is just give the clarion call of the gospel and beckon them to the wedding supper, and then he decides from there. So he continues in verse 11. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. He said, "Friend," he asked, "how did you get in here without wedding clothes?" The man was speechless. So there's a possibility, and look around you the next time you're in a church building at the people around you. Now, again, we're not meant to judge, but those who call themselves Christians aren't perhaps what they always seem to be, including ourselves. We should first look in the mirror. Just because we profess to be something, are we really wearing wedding clothes? This comes from two scriptures in the Bible, one Old Testament, one New Testament, that I want to share with you. The first one is in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah 61:10 says this, I delight greatly in the Lord. My soul rejoices in my God, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation and arrayed me in a robe of righteousness. So when Jesus, or the king, is saying, he comes in and sees the man not wearing wedding clothes, he doesn't see the garment of salvation or the robe of righteousness. He's not wearing the wedding clothes. As a bridegroom adorns his head like a priest, and as a bride adorns herself with her jewels. Fast forward to the book of Revelation, Revelation 19, verses 7 through 8. Says, let us rejoice and be glad and give him glory, for the wedding of the Lamb has come. What this very parable is looking forward to. And his bride has made herself ready. Fine linen, bright and clean. The wedding garment, the wedding clothes was given her to wear. Fine linen stands for the righteous acts of God's holy people. So in this instance, this person, remember, the servants or the disciples were called to just invite them to the supper, invite them in. And then the Son of God, the King, the bridegroom is the one who then decides who actually has the wedding garments on. Comes in and says, you're not wearing wedding clothes. And the man was speechless. Verse 13, then the king told the attendants, tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Why was this man here? Maybe he came in because the food was good. Maybe he came in because he was dating somebody that also came to the wedding supper, i.e. the church. Maybe he came in because it was good business to do that. Maybe he came in because he felt like doing good deeds would get him into heaven. For whatever reason, he came in, but he did not honor the king's son by accepting his righteousness. He did not accept the wedding garments. He was not prepared. He was not ready wearing. It would be the same thing as like us coming to a wedding and wearing our holiest jeans and rattiest shirts. We would not be honoring the bride and the groom. We'd be coming in unbathed and in our worst garments. We wouldn't be honoring them. It's not about what we're wearing. Jesus isn't tied up in that. It's representative of what's in our hearts is what Christ is looking at. And he finishes the parable with verse 14. For many are invited, but few are chosen. It's nothing that we earn. It's what we've done. In other words, this person that isn't wearing the wedding garments has possibly been around the king, been around Christ, but has never made him Lord, has never turned over his life to him, has never actually put on the garment of salvation and the robes of Christ's righteousness. Maybe he's tried to put on his own righteousness, tried to do things to earn salvation, but he's never actually put on the robes of Christ's righteousness.